Welcome back to my channel, guys, and today, and over the next few videos in the Hellraiser series that I'm doing, I'm going to be taking a look at a script treatment for a Hellraiser remake that was actually made before the Hellraiser script, which I have been doing videos on. So settle in for the long haul. This is going to be a few videos long. I'm going to essentially present it to you as an audiobook. And they should be about 3 videos because, again, it's quite long. It's 40 pages, and to discuss it all, you're looking at over an hour. So about 3 videos worth in bite-sized chunks. Hopefully you will enjoy it. It's, in my eyes, just as a quick one to get you interested, it's actually a lot better than the remake script I have been discussing. It introduces a brand new Pinhead and a brand new creation of Pinhead as well. So there's a little bit of a sneak preview, and let's get into part 1 of the script treatment for Hellraiser Remake, which Clive did in 2007. Somewhere in the Far East, a nameless town, its street filthy and poor. There is only one white man on these stinking streets, Frank Cotton. He wears the remnants of an American infantry uniform, but it's clear he's no longer a soldier. He looks driven, obsessive. He finds his way to the door of a strange individual who welcomes him in. He's the guardian of the box, though he looks at present like an unremarkable old man. There's a brief exchange between the two men, beginning with the guardian's simple inquiry, "What's your pleasure?" Cotton has heard this man can provide experiences beyond anything Frank can imagine. The man confirms that he can. Frank puts down a wad of dollars, the man takes them and gives Frank a puzzle box, the Lament configuration. Frank isn't happy. He demands to know what kind of game the man's playing. "It's you who plays the game, Mr. Cotton. Solve the puzzle and you'll discover things very few men have experienced." "I didn't tell you my name," Frank says. He's got his gun out now. The shadowy room is full of whispers and he's unnerved. Keeping his gun leveled at the man, he takes the box and his money. Then he backs towards the door, glancing back to find the handle. There's a bestial noise. He looks back into the room to see that the flesh of the guardian's face is blackening and curling back, as though he is burning alive. Beneath his human face is something else, something terrifying. Frank fires again and again. The guardian rises, his robes falling away. The bullets have no effect on the demon, whose appearance we scarcely see in this scene. Frank opens the door and backs out into the sunlit street. There is an eerie hush. A woman, looking down from a window, closes the shutters. Several beats of complete silence. Then the door slams behind him. It's over, and he has the box. And we cut to a street in the suburbs of Chicago, and a house in that street in need of some repair. Its paint is peeling, its hedges are overgrown, and inside, the place is dusty and deserted. A few pieces of ugly furniture remain, but little else. Upstairs, in one of the empty bedrooms, Frank, in need of several days of shaving, sits sweating in a square of candles, trying to solve the puzzle box. Finally, he succeeds, and as he opens the box, pieces of solid brick and plaster crack and gape. A bell tolls. Now Frank looks up, smiles. There are 2 women coming through the light towards him. They are dressed in fetishistic garb. These aren't Cenobites, they're bait, to distract the human subject. And while they distract Frank, whispering promises about all of the weird pleasures they're going to introduce him to, he fails to notice the other presences in the attic room with him. Figures who don't have any of the human beauty of the women, but are the demons we know as Cenobites. They carry instruments of torture, and as they approach Frank, they walk through chains that end in hooks. Now we're with Frank. He's getting hot and heavy with his 2 lovers. But suddenly, his sighs turn to a scream. He lifts his left foot, there's a hook through it. Another hook goes through his right foot, and he's hailed up into the air. Upside down, the blood from his feet splashing on the ground as he is spun around. Seeing the Cenobites, he then starts to scream. The Cenobites circle him, hacking at him with their torture implements. The girls to whom he was making love, now naked on their knees in front of him, bathe in his spattered blood in spurts. Even now, we see only the most teasing glimpses of Cenobites. This is a new generation of torturers we see, more intricate, more freakish, and more destructive. There is, however, no Pinhead. Finally, against a background of demonic shrieks, one of the 3 new Cenobites picks up the box and closes it. In an instant, the whole infernal scene, Frank, half-skinned, the Cenobites working on him, the women licking his blood off each other, disappears. A series of shots, covering a passage of time, bring us back down through the house of the front door. We hear 2 arguing on the step outside. The door opens, Larry and Julia Cotton, a couple with very little besides their marriage vows in common. Larry's perhaps 10 years older than Julia, who is in her late 20s. They have a dysfunctional marriage. Larry is a sports nut, and barely pays his beautiful wife any attention. As they go around the large house, with its eerie collection of Catholic statues and pictures of saints on the wall, it's clear they're intending to move into the house. Larry says he'll get rid of all the kitschy Catholic stuff that his mother left when she died. Thank God for that, Julia says. Those unnerve me. When they go upstairs, they find the room where Larry's brother, Frank, had been in residence. Julia goes through his scattered belongings, all dusty, and finds a picture of him along with some bare-breasted dancer from Bangkok. She tears it in half, keeping only half of the image. The phone rings. Julia picks it up. It's Larry's daughter from his first marriage, Kirsty, a very attractive girl in her late teens. She lives in the neighbourhood of the old Cotton house, and she offers to help move Larry and Julia in. Now it's moving day, and everything's happening at once. A plumber is working on the clogged pipes, an electrician making the lights flicker. Kirsty arrives to be welcomed by her open-armed father. "Come to Daddy," he says lovingly. She offers to make some coffee for the crew, while Julia is upstairs, obsessing on that torn photograph of Frank. While Larry and 2 grunts attempt to get the king-size mattress up the stairs, and Kirsty unpacks food she's brought, we see Julia's flashback to her first meeting with Frank. His first possessive kiss. Their first lovemaking, which she remembers as ecstatic. But Frank's not satisfied, he wants something more. When he leaves the bed, Julia goes after him, catching his arm, and making a significant promise. She'd do anything for him, she says. Anything. All he has to do is name. Downstairs, there's an accident. Larry puts a gash in his hand from getting it trapped between the bed and a nail protruding from the banisters. He goes instinctively to Julia for help. He hates the sight of his own blood. He's sickly white, running with clammy sweat. He finds Julia in the attic, standing in the square of burned down candle stubs that mark the place where Frank solved the box. Dripping blood from his injured hand, Larry seeks Julia's help. She looks at the wound, and as she does so, blood drops from his hand onto the boards, each splash erupting against the floor in slow motion. Kirsty offers to drive them to the hospital to have the wound stitched up. The 3 head down the stairs and out of the house, but we stay in the attic room. The blood from Frank's hand is disappearing into the boards, as though it was being sucked up, and seconds later, the room begins to creak and shake, the boards popping their nails as they twist and turn, the rats running up the walls in their terror. A rudimentary limb, like an arm with partially formed fingers, punches through from under the floor. Pools of bloody matter are squeezing out between the rotted boards, cohesing to form the raw anatomy of a human being. Finally, after this anguish, it draws its first painful breath and throws back its head, unleashing a cry. Frank Cotton is back from the dead. A few days later, Larry and Julia have their first dinner party at the house. Larry has had too much to drink. Julia excuses herself, warning her guests that they're still fixing up the house and the lock on the bathroom door doesn't work, so be warned. This gets a little laugh, and she goes upstairs to fetch some painkillers from the bathroom for her headache. Then, hearing a noise above her, she goes up another flight to the attic. The light doesn't work, but there's enough illumination from the street for her to see the monstrous, sickly pale mess of flesh, which is far from a coherent body of Frank, who she has obsessed over during every waking moment. She's horrified, of course, but when this ragged creature, its face barely formed, begs her to help, she listens. He needs blood, lots of it. Then he'll be the man he was. He'll be the lover he was. And Julia is ready for that. As she heads downstairs, she hears Kirsty leaving the bathroom. Julia retreats into the shadows, but Kirsty is aware that she's there, even though she doesn't show herself, and a vague suspicion of Julia takes root in Kirsty. The next day, Julia goes out dressed to kill. She looks superb, and she has no difficulty picking up a businessman at a stylish bar. They go back to the house. There is some sexy banter between the two, and the man, so mesmerised by Julia, does not register anything suspicious until they get to the empty attic. But by that time, it's too late. The door is locked. As the victim starts to undress, Julia comes at him with a claw hammer. He hears her, turns, too late. He gets the claw full in the face. It lodges there as blood pours out. He's blinded by blood and pain, but he still tries to escape. Julia wrenches the claw out, pulling away a chunk of his face in the process, and whacks him again, over and over. Down he goes, finally, and the hungry, monstrous Frank comes out of the shadows, pulling itself along its rudimentary arms till it's close enough to feast on the twitching corpse. This is the first. The next day she does the same again. We see a truncated version of the process. Julia leaves the house. Julia opens the attic door with a young man who is already undressing as he steps inside. "No bed," he says. "I like it rough." "I bet you do, lady. I bet you do." He sees something moving in the shadows, but before he can speak he gets a hammer blow in the face and goes down, wearing just his underwear and socks. He's not dead, not nearly. He tries to get to his feet, blood pouring down his face, then he hears Frank moving behind him. He turns. Frank emerges from the shadows. He's much more human, having fed the day before. He's a pale, skinned man, a living anatomy lesson, glistening with juices. The victim gets to his feet, but Frank takes him down, pinning him to the bare boards as he digs out the shrieking man's eyes and swallows them like oysters. Julia asks him if they taste good. He grins. "You're not freaked?" "I was yesterday, but today I see how much better you are, so it doesn't freak me out. I just want..." The victim is still shrieking, spoiling the conversation. Frank tears out his tongue and eats it. "Sorry, you were saying?" "Just that I want you back the way you were." Two more and you'll have me," Frank says. He drives his fingers into the man's body. The mute, blinded man is still very much alive, thrashing as Frank draws his life force out. "Look," Frank says, extending his arm for Julia's scrutiny. The elaborate circuitry of Frank's body, the nerves, the ligaments and muscles, swell deeper in colour as the victim dies. "You got any cigarettes in the house?" Frank says. Cut to Frank wearing the dead man's shirt and trousers and shoes, his face and hands still skinless and blood red. He is smoking and telling Julia what happened to him. He shows her the box. It's a puzzle box. The lament configuration. You solve it and you're supposed to get pleasures you can't even imagine. And did you? No. I saw the no man's land between this world and hell. It exists? Oh shit, yes. But for some reason, maybe because you were here, thinking of me, I never got taken to the pit itself. Why did you do it in the first place? I wanted more than I could get from life. I wanted new experiences, forbidden things. Maybe there'd be some pain in there with the pleasure, but I was okay with that. You gotta have a little bitter with the sweet. But not what? They have this room. Christ. He lights a second cigarette from the end of the first, shaking as he does so. They turn people they've tempted, not all of them, just a chosen few, into Cenobites. How? Surgery, acid, and machines. They got machines made to do things to a body beyond pain, beyond anything I've ever seen or imagined. Terrible, merciless. "And why aren't you one of them?" Julia asks. "Like I said, I was always halfway between. I wasn't a perfect subject. And then I got lucky. I escaped back to this room. The only problem was I had no physical substance to speak of. Until Larry's blood. Yep, that started it. Now I need to be flesh and blood and bone so that I can give you what you need." He kisses her. She has a moment of revulsion, then a perverse passion overwhelms the revulsion. And she returns his kiss, his bloody face rubbing against hers. Suddenly, a door slams downstairs and Larry calls for Julia. He's home early. Julia's covered in blood now, of course. Not just her mouth, but everywhere Frank's had his hands. Barely controlling her panic, she goes down to the bathroom and turns on the shower. She tries to lock the door, but of course it doesn't work. The room is filling with steam. She strips off, hiding the bloody clothes in a basket half filled with used towels. Larry is coming upstairs, still calling her name. She glances at herself in the long mirror. She's very bloody. Frank used the few seconds of their embrace to touch her breasts, her back, her butt. "Julia!" Larry is right outside the bathroom door. "Are you okay?" She steps into the shower as the door opens. The steam conceals her bloody torso from him long enough for her to draw the shower curtain. "You want your back washing?" "No! No thank you. I'm not feeling too good." "What's wrong?" As he asks the question, he sees 2 drops of blood on the white tiled floor and a smear of it on the sink. "It's the usual. Boy, this last month, just flew by. Would you let me clean, baby? Then I'll feel better." "Oh, yeah, sure, of course." He leaves, closing the door. Standing beneath the full force of the shower, Julia looks as though she might crack up and start crying. But no, it's laughter that overtakes her, in a surge of relief. Upstairs, directly above the bathroom, Frank sits in the gathering dusk and hears Julia's laughter. He smiles to himself, impressed that Julia can take events such as those she has witnessed in her stride. Back at her apartment, Kirsty is preparing for bed. She makes one last goodnight call to her dad, just to see that he's okay. The phone is picked up, and she tries to get someone to answer. "Hi, it's only me," but then the line goes dead. She puts the receiver down and turns to her bed to find that there's somebody in it, covered with a sheet, like a shroud over a corpse. She gets up, terrified. Blood starts to seep through the sheet. She pulls it off, and it's her father, his heart torn from his chest, lying on the bed. He sits up, she screams, and wakes from this nightmare, sweating and tearful. Moments later, at the Cotton house, the phone rings. Though it's the middle of the night, Julia tells Larry to get it. He goes into the hallway to do so. While the phone rings, we cut to Frank on the floor above, a shadowy figure, but clearly much more whole now that he's fed. He's rat catching, and he's fast. He catches one as Larry picks up the phone. The squirming rat squeals as he bites into it. He'll take nourishment from any source. Down below, Larry hears the squeal, and then the sound of Frank moving. He's puzzled, but first he has to answer the call. It's Kirsty, of course, wondering if he's alright. He reassures her, of course he is. Kirsty laughs off her bad dream and goes back to sleep. Larry puts down the phone and heads up the stairs, barefoot. He opens the attic door. The large room is full of shadows. The air smells foul of rot and rebirth. He advances a little way and puts his naked foot on something disgusting. A piece of the pale, wet matter we saw hanging from Frank when he was eating. A part of Frank's old self, which he's now shed off. Larry is disgusted, sickened. He retreats to the door, and as he does so, a dark figure from inside the room moves across the audience's field of vision. Larry senses it, looks up. "Is there somebody there?" he says without much conviction. A rat runs out of the room, past him. "We got rats," he says to himself, relieved, then closes the attic door. Back inside, we see the outline of Frank's face, still skinless, but now vaguely recognizable. "Dumb as ever, brother," he says very quietly. The following morning, Larry is heading out to work. Julia is drinking coffee. "Call the exterminators," Larry says as he heads to the door. "We've got rats in the attic room. Get them here today." "Not today, I can't." "What's so important?" "Just stuff. Oh, and don't forget Kirsty's coming by to pick up all of the religious stuff we found." "What does she want with that crap?" "She's putting it into one of her art projects. Don't roll your eyes, it's better than throwing it all in the trash. Frank and I used to love coming here as kids because of all the weird plaster saints." Julia pastes on a completely phony smile. "I'll put them outside for her, that way she doesn't come in and you don't have to make conversation." "I didn't say that," Julia replied. "But that's what you meant," Larry replies. He's irritated. "Kirsty's my flesh and blood, Julia. When you married me, you became her stepmother. I know that sticks in your craw, but you're going to be late," Julia tells him, neatly bringing the conversation to a halt. "Just be nice to her," Larry says as he leaves for work. "I will, I promise." As soon as Larry's gone, Julia goes upstairs, goes to her makeup mirror, puts on a particularly provocative colour of lipstick, admires herself in the mirror, smiling. Over the next several days, as she finally discovers her true murderous purpose in life, she becomes more beautiful. Her hair immaculate, her eyes full of mystery and sexual energy. An hour later, and Julia is heading towards the house with Frank's nourishment for the day. At the door, she stops to get out her keys. Looking around a little nervously, she fails to notice Kirsty, who is standing on the sidewalk behind her car, which she parked on the other side of the street. The trunk is open, and 2 of the religious pieces from the house have already been stowed. As she picks up a 3rd piece from the sidewalk, she glances up to see her stepmother with a middle-aged man going into the house. She watches, concealed by the open trunk, until they go inside. She then closes the trunk and goes back to the house, doing her best to remain unseen. She fails. Through a hole in the filthy attic window, Frank looks down cautiously on Kirsty as she approaches the house. "Well, look at you, little lady," he says to himself, his voice still a broken drawl from his half-finished face. "Why don't you come up here? I'll teach you some stuff you'd never learn any other way." Then he hears Julia's voice outside the attic door and hides as she brings in Frank's next meal. But this time, things don't go quite so smoothly. The man doesn't want to make love on a dirty floor. He tries to leave. Julia slams the door. Downstairs in the kitchen, Kirsty is collecting up more of the plaster saints. She hears the slammed door. And in the attic room, the panicked man attempts to pull Julia away from the door. She refuses. He backhands her, a blow that throws her against the wall. With an almost bestial roar, Frank leaps out of the darkness. Kirsty hears his roar of rage. She starts up the stairs as Frank sticks his fingers into the man's neck, all the way to the knuckles. The prey lets out a grotesque sound which brings blood with it, pouring down over his chin, down his neck. He struggles violently, but his face is beginning to wither, his eyes sinking into his sockets, as Frank's hunger claims his life force. Julia is still sitting against the wall where the man's blow dropped her. She watches as Frank feeds, which she's never done. It's disgusting, of course, but she watches with twisted curiosity on her face. Suddenly, the victim, his face already sagging and bleeding as Frank feeds on him, pulls free and runs towards the door. Julia, still on the floor, tries to stop him, but he kicks her away and opens the attic door onto the landing, appearing just as Kirsty climbs to the top of the stairs. She manages to stifle her scream at the sight of him. Then he reaches out and catches hold of her. As his bloodied fingers touch hers, Frank appears around the corner of the door and, with one last blow, strikes him down. Then he goes after Kirsty, grabbing her and throwing her into his room. He yells for Julia to get out. "Leave the bitch to Uncle Frank," he says. Julia leaves, slamming the door. Now it's just Kirsty and the still hungry Frank, face to face. He flatters her, he taunts her, and finally attacks her. She strikes back, plunging her fist into his skinless face. Then, while he reels around, bent doubled by pain, she looks for a weapon and finds the box. The moment she picks it up, she realizes the object has great significance for him. He begs her to put it down, leave it alone. Now it's she who is in charge of this cat and mouse game. "Give me the box," Frank begs. "You want it?" she replies. He is barely nodded when she throws it through the window. He lets out a cry of rage and frustration, and meanwhile, Kirsty makes her getaway, pushing past Julia to get out of the house. She's losing blood from the various wounds she sustained at Frank's hand. She staggers to her car, picking up the box from the ground outside of the house as she goes, her consciousness threatening to be extinguished at any moment. And that is where I will finish part 1 of this script. That is halfway through the script treatment. As you can see, there is a lot of similarities to the original film, but I will say this, it gets a lot better. And with respect to this versus the entire remake script I have been discussing, this is a much better version of the film in my eyes. This is how to do a remake. But guys, that's where I will finish it up here today. Stay tuned for part 2. We'll probably be able to get this done in 2 parts completely, as this is page 20. I know it's been a long haul. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you sat down with some coffee, and stay tuned for the next one. Guys, as always, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button. Stay up to date on all the world of pop culture and movie news, and this, my series of films that could have been, or cancelled scripts and script treatments, those sorts of things. As always, guys, I've been Mr. H. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and a share. Take care.